The old asylum stood like a blight against the night sky, its stone walls slick with the cold damp of decades without warmth. Cracks ran through the once pristine facade, now overrun with creeping ivy that seemed to reach out like skeletal hands. The place had been abandoned for over 60 years, its dark history buried under layers of dust and denial. But tonight, it was alive again with the faint hum of equipment and the whispered conversations of the paranormal investigators. There were 4 of them: Kara, the leader, a steely-eyed woman with a passion for uncovering the truth; Mark, the tech expert, his hand always busy with gadgets; Julia, the skeptic, who hid her fear behind a wall of sarcasm; and Tom, the empath, who could feel the presence of spirits. "This place gives me the creeps," Julia muttered as they passed through the rusted iron gates, the hinges groaning under the strain of disuse. "You said that about the last place too," Mark replied, his voice clipped as he adjusted the thermal camera strapped to his chest. "Yeah, but that place didn't have a history like this," she shot back, her eyes darting to the shadowy windows above. Kara shushed them, her attention fixed on the entrance ahead. "Let's stay focused. We're here to find evidence, not scare each other." They crossed the threshold into the asylum, their flashlights casting long beams of light that barely cut through the oppressive darkness. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something far more unsettling, an undercurrent of rot, like old meat left too long in the sun. The floor creaked under their weight, and every step seemed to echo back at them, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets long forgotten. Tom shivered, though the air was far from cold. "There's something wrong here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kara shot him a look. "What do you mean? Can't you feel it? It's like the place is alive." Mark snorted. "You're just psyching yourself out, man. Let's get this over with." But Tom knew better. The asylum wasn't just a building. It was a wound in the earth, festering with the pain and suffering of those who had once been trapped inside. They split into pairs, with Kara and Tom heading toward the East Wing, where the most notorious experiments had taken place. Mark and Julia took the West, tasked with setting up equipment in the patient wards. The plan was simple: capture as much evidence as possible, then regroup and analyze. As Kara and Tom moved deeper into the East Wing, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thickening with each step. The walls were lined with rusted gurneys and broken medical equipment, remnants of the asylum's grim past. Tom's breath quickened, the oppressive energy seeping into his bones. "Kara, I don't like this," he said, his voice shaking. Kara paused, her flashlight revealing a set of double doors at the end of the hallway. "We're almost there. Just a little longer." She pushed the doors open, and they stepped into what had once been an operating theater. The room was vast, its domed ceiling lost in shadows. Rows of empty chairs faced a single gurney in the center, its restraint still in place. Bloodstains marred the cold metal surface, too old to be recent but too vivid to be forgotten. Tom's stomach churned. This is where it happened, isn't it?" Kara nodded, her gaze fixed on the gurney. "This is where the patients were experimented on, the ones who didn't make it." Tom's heart pounded in his chest as a wave of nausea washed over him. He could feel them. The spirits of the patients, their pain and terror clinging to the air like a suffocating fog. Suddenly his breath hitched. "Kara, there's someone here." Kara frowned, her flashlight sweeping the room. "Where?" Tom pointed toward the far corner, his hand trembling. "Over there." She turned her beam in the direction he indicated, and for a moment she saw it too, a shadowy figure, standing motionless in the dark. It was tall, impossibly thin, its features obscured by the gloom. But the eyes shone with a malevolent intelligence, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Before Kara could react, the figure disappeared, leaving nothing but the cold and the silence in its wake. "We need to leave," Tom said, his voice tight with fear. Kara hesitated. She had come here to find the truth, to uncover what had really happened in this place. But the truth was starting to look far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "We need evidence," she said finally, her resolve hardening. "Let's set up the cameras and—" The lights went out. Panic surged through Kara as the darkness swallowed them whole. She fumbled for her flashlight, but it flickered and died in her hand. Tom's voice cut through the blackness, sharp with terror. "Kara, what's happening?" "I don't know," she shouted back, her heart racing. "Stay close." A faint mechanical whirring filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. It was a sound that didn't belong in a place so old and decrepit. Kara's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. And then, she realized, it was coming from the gurney. The restraints on the gurney began to tighten, creaking as if pulled by invisible hands. Kara could feel the presence of the spirits intensifying, their fear and anger pressing down on her like a physical weight. And then, out of the darkness, a voice emerged. It was low, guttural, and filled with a kind of madness that sent shivers down her spine. They never left, you know. The patients, they're still here, waiting for their final treatment. Tom whimpered, his hands clutching at Kara's arm. "Who's there?" The voice chuckled, the sound echoing off the walls. "The good doctor, of course. You came to find the truth, didn't you? Well, here it is. The final experiment, and you're the subjects." A blinding light erupted from the gurney, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Kara shielded her eyes, but the light seared through her lids, burning into her mind. She could see them, the patients, strapped to their beds, their faces twisted in agony. And standing over them was the doctor, his hands stained with blood, his eyes gleaming with a sick, sadistic glee. The light faded, leaving Kara and Tom gasping in the darkness. But the doctor's presence remained, a malevolent force that seemed to seep into their very souls. "We have to get out of here," Tom said, his voice trembling. Kara nodded, but her legs felt like lead, her mind clouded with the horrors she had just witnessed. She forced herself to move, dragging Tom with her as they stumbled toward the exit. But the asylum wasn't done with them yet. As they reached the hallway, the doors slammed shut behind them, the sound reverberating through the building like a gunshot. The walls seemed to close in, the narrow corridor stretching into infinity. Kara's breath came in ragged gasps as she fought against the rising panic. "This isn't real," she told herself. "It's just an illusion." But the asylum had a way of making nightmares into reality. They ran, their footsteps echoing through the endless halls. But no matter how far they went, the asylum twisted and turned around them, leading them in circles, trapping them in its labyrinthine depths. Tom's fear was palpable, his breath hitching with every step. He could feel the doctor's presence, lurking just behind them, always just out of sight. Suddenly, Tom was yanked backward by an unseen force, his body slamming into the wall. Kara spun around, her flashlight flickering weakly as she searched for him. "Tom, where are you?" "I'm here," he cried, his voice muffled by the darkness. She found him pinned to the wall, his eyes wide with terror as he struggled against the invisible grip. Kara reached out to pull him free, but as her hand touched his, she felt a searing pain shoot through her arm. She yanked her hand back, staring in horror at the burn marks that marred her skin. The doctor's voice filled the air, cruel and mocking. "You can't escape me. You'll never leave this place." Kara's mind raced, desperate for a way out. She remembered the stories she had read about the asylum, the rumors of a secret passage used by the staff to flee in case of a riot, but finding it in this twisted version of reality seemed impossible. "Tom, we have to find the passage," she said, her voice shaking. Tom nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Where do we start?" Kara's mind raced as she tried to recall the layout of the building. "It's near the old administrative offices. If we can get there, we might have a chance." They pushed forward, the asylum's corridors warping and shifting around them, as if the building itself was alive, trying to keep them trapped within its walls. They could feel the doctor's presence growing stronger with each passing moment, his malevolent energy pressing down on them like a suffocating blanket. Finally, they reached the administrative offices, the door hanging off its hinges. The room beyond was in shambles, papers scattered across the floor, furniture overturned and broken. But in the far corner, partially hidden behind a collapsed bookshelf, was a narrow doorway, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. "This has to be it," Kara said, her voice filled with a mix of hope and desperation. They crawled through the passage, the walls closing in around them. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing in from all sides. But they kept moving, driven by the primal need to survive. The passage opened into a small chamber, its walls lined with dusty shelves and old medical supplies. In the center of the room was a single chair, its leather cracked and worn with age. A figure sat in the chair, slumped over, as if asleep. Kara's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the figure, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The light fell on the figure's face, and she gasped, stumbling backward. It was the doctor. But this was no ghost. The body was real, its flesh decayed and rotting, the remnants of a life long gone. In the doctor's hand was a journal, its pages yellowed with age. Kara reached for the journal, her hands shaking as she opened it. The pages were filled with the doctor's handwriting, scrawled in a frenzy of madness and obsession. He had documented everything, the experiments, the tortures, the final moments of his patients. And on the last page, a single sentence, written in blood: "The final experiment is complete." Kara's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. The doctor had been trying to escape death itself, to transfer his consciousness into the asylum, to become one with the building. And in doing so, he had trapped the souls of his victims, binding them to the walls, the floors, the very air they breathed. The asylum wasn't haunted by spirits. It was the spirit. The door behind them slammed shut, and the walls began to close in, the chamber shrinking around them. Kara could feel the doctor's presence, his laughter echoing in her mind. She knew they had no way out. They were a part of the final experiment now. Kara dropped the journal, her hands trembling as she looked at Tom, who was staring at the walls in horror as they started to press in on them. The walls creaked, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. Kara felt her body growing heavier, as if the very air was suffocating her. She closed her eyes, and the last thing she heard was the doctor's voice, whispering in her ear, "You'll never leave this place." And then there was nothing. The asylum stood silent and still, its walls bearing no trace of the horrors that had transpired within. The equipment was left behind, cameras still rolling, capturing nothing but the empty halls and the creeping darkness. No one ever came looking for the investigators. No one ever found them. The final experiment was complete.